Welcome back, dear friends. Let's take a moment to unwind together and immerse ourselves in a world of mystery and whispers, where every shadow hides a secret waiting to be revealed. The wind howled through the old mansion, rattling the windows as Hercule Poirot stood before the mysterious locked door. The room beyond had been untouched for decades, yet tonight, someone, had disturbed its silence. A single cryptic message, scrawled in haste, lay on the floor. The truth lies within these walls, but only one of us will walk out alive. Poirot's eyes flickered with recognition, the pieces of a deadly game falling into place. But which one of them was the killer? And who would be the next victim? The clock was ticking, and Poirot had only moments to unravel the deadly riddle before it was too late. Would he expose the truth in time, or would the walls close in around him? Chapter 1. The Invitation. The carriage creaked as it slowly wound its way up the narrow, winding road. The sky above was a dark canvas of clouds, and the sound of the wheels rolling against the gravel was the only noise that dared disturb the heavy silence of the evening. Hercule Poirot, the famed Belgian detective, sat inside, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape, his mind already beginning to weave through the mystery that had drawn him to this place. Unusual, he muttered to himself in his thick accent. It is not often that one receives an invitation like this. A mystery concealed within an invitation, a delicate touch of intrigue. He raised an eyebrow, his fingers brushing the letter that had arrived unexpectedly, sealed in rich, dark purple wax. It had been delivered without a name, yet it carried an undeniable allure, an invitation that promised an experience unlike any other. He adjusted his coat, his polished shoes clicking softly against the carriage floor. The letter had read, "Monsieur Poirot, you are cordially invited to a gathering of rare distinction. Come to the secluded manor of Lady Evelyn, where you will encounter an evening of mystery, indulgence, and discovery. Do not ask why you are summoned. Instead, come with an open mind and prepared for the unexpected. I trust you will find the answers you seek upon your arrival. With anticipation, Lady Evelyn." The words danced in his mind, each syllable sharp and calculated, a puzzle in themselves. Lady Evelyn. The name lingered in his thoughts. A lady of distinction, I presume, he mused. But who is she truly? Why does she summon me, a simple detective, to her remote manor in the middle of nowhere? His fingers turned the letter over, and a slight frown appeared on his face as he examined the elegant, curling handwriting, the subtle flourish of the closing. Lady Evelyn. The name carried weight, yet there was something about it that stirred in his chest, a whisper of something forgotten, something hidden. The carriage slowed as they approached a towering iron gate, surrounded by thick, ancient trees whose branches clawed at the grey sky. The air outside had grown heavier, laden with the scent of damp earth and the distant perfume of roses blooming under the shroud of mist. Poirot's keen eyes narrowed as he spotted the grand estate, its silhouette barely visible in the haze of the approaching dusk. As the carriage passed through the gate and onto the winding driveway, Poirot felt a subtle shift in the air, a tension, a shift in the energy of the place. It was not just the isolation of the manor that struck him, but the palpable sense that something was about to unfold, something he could not yet see, but could certainly feel. The mansion loomed ahead, an imposing structure of stone and ivy, its many windows dark and uninviting, like watching eyes that had witnessed too many secrets over the years. The mansion stood like a sentinel at the edge of the world. And yet, Poirot felt as though he had crossed into another realm entirely. The winds had picked up, their howls echoing like whispers of long-lost voices, but still Poirot's expression remained unchanged, calm and precise. When the carriage stopped, Poirot stepped out, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The air was cool, the ground beneath his feet uneven as he made his way toward the mansion's front steps, his sharp mind already calculating the most probable reasons for his invitation. But as he ascended the stone steps, his heart beat just a little faster, a small thrill tingling through his fingertips. There was a mystery here, he could feel it, and Poirot never backed away from a mystery. At the top of the steps, a tall, elegantly dressed butler awaited him. His face was unreadable, his posture rigid, but Poirot caught the briefest flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of uncertainty. The butler's voice was smooth, but it held a certain formality that hinted at deeper layers. "Good evening, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Evelyn is expecting you," he said, bowing slightly. Poirot nodded, adjusting his gloves, his mind already churning with thoughts. "Ah, but of course," he murmured, stepping into the foyer. The door creaked shut behind him, sealing him inside. The grand hall was dimly lit, the soft glow of candlelight flickering on the walls, casting long, haunting shadows across the polished wood floor. The air inside smelled faintly of aged wood, lavender, and something else, something distant and ancient, as though the walls themselves held memories of a time long past. A staircase, its railing carved with intricate designs, led up to a second floor, where shadows seemed to shift as though they were alive. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something, someone, to awaken the secrets hidden within its walls. "Your room is prepared, Monsieur Poirot," the butler said, his voice soft yet firm. "Please, allow me to show you the way." Poirot followed, his footsteps echoing as they ascended the grand staircase. His mind, however, was elsewhere. The tension in the air was thick, as though something sinister was about to unfold. He had been in enough of these grand estates to know that beneath the polished exteriors and genteel facades often lay secrets, dark, twisted and hidden from the prying eyes of the world, and Poirot, being who he was, could not ignore the instinctual pull to uncover them. At the end of the hall, the butler opened a door to a spacious room, softly lit by the flickering flames of a fireplace. The furnishings were elegant, the bed draped in velvet linens, and yet the room felt cold. It felt empty, as though it had been waiting for something. The window beside the bed offered a view of the mist-covered grounds, the landscape obscured by a veil of fog. "Lady Evelyn will join you shortly," the butler said, before leaving the room with a final, almost imperceptible glance. Poirot stood alone, his reflection faintly mirrored in the darkened window. He had arrived at the heart of this mystery, but he could feel, deep in his bones, that the true puzzle was only just beginning. And in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the firelight, he knew something awaited, something that would pull him into a game of deception and secrets, one that would keep him guessing until the very last moment. With a final glance out the window, Poirot whispered to himself, "Yes, there is something here. But what?" His fingers twitched in anticipation. The game was afoot. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The night stretched on, its cool embrace settling over the grand manor as the clock struck midnight. The house was alive with the hum of soft voices and the clinking of glasses. The guests had gathered in the opulent drawing room, where the dim candlelight cast flickering shadows across the velvet drapes and rich mahogany furniture. The scent of wine and aged leather filled the air, but beneath it there lingered a faint, almost imperceptible tension. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath. Hercule Poirot, ever the observer, stood to one side, watching the guests, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. There were whispers here and there, polite conversations that masked the growing undercurrent of unease. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, waiting for the mystery to begin. Lady Evelyn, the enigmatic hostess, stood near the fireplace, her figure framed by the dancing flames. She wore a smile, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her elegance was undeniable, her movements deliberate, but Poirot could see the faintest flicker of something not quite right, beneath her poised exterior. As Poirot made his way across the room, he found himself drawn to a tall man with dark eyes who stood by the window, staring out into the blackness of the night. His posture was tense, his fingers tapping nervously on the glass. Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment, a flicker of recognition stirring within his mind. The man's face was familiar, but Poirot couldn't quite place him. Perhaps from a case he had solved in the past, or a fleeting encounter. Yet there was something about the man's presence that felt wrong. Poirot approached him quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Monsieur," he said, his voice a smooth blend of French precision, "you seem troubled. What weighs on your mind?" The man turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Poirot. For a moment, it was as if he hadn't heard the question. Then his lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Monsieur Poirot, always the detective, yes? I should have known you'd notice." Poirot remained calm, his gaze never leaving the man's face. "You must forgive me, but your unease is as plain as day. Something is amiss here, yes. You have the look of a man who is not only uncertain but afraid." The man looked away, his gaze shifting back to the window, his shoulders stiffening as though in anticipation of something. "It's just the storm, monsieur. A storm is coming, and not just the one outside." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I feel it, in the air. Something terrible is going to happen tonight." Poirot studied him carefully, his mind turning the words over and over. "A storm is coming." The words seemed too deliberate, too pointed. Was it the storm outside that troubled the man, or was it something far darker? Poirot had learned long ago that words were often the best clues, if one knew how to listen. Before he could ask another question, a sharp noise shattered the air. A loud crash, followed by hurried footsteps that echoed through the hall. The guests froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the sound. The tension in the room was palpable, like the air before a lightning strike. Poirot's instincts kicked into high gear. He scanned the room quickly, his mind already sorting through the possibilities. One of the guests had disappeared, slipping away unnoticed in the chaos of the gathering. The general, a tall, imposing man with a history of leadership in the army, had vanished, his place in the room now conspicuously empty. The other guests began to murmur, their voices rising in alarm, but Poirot's mind remained focused. "Do not panic," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Stay where you are. I will investigate." He moved swiftly, his small frame cutting through the crowd as he followed the sound of the retreating footsteps, his mind racing with theories. The crash had come from the study, a room at the far end of the mansion. As Poirot approached, He could feel a sense of foreboding settle around him like a cloak. The door to the study was ajar, and Poirot slipped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from a lone candle flickering weakly on the desk. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the disorder, the overturned chair, the scattered papers, the faint scent of tobacco smoke in the air. But it was the figure standing by the window that drew his attention. The general was there, his back turned, his posture rigid and tense. "Ah, Monsieur le Général," Poirot said, his voice a touch softer than usual. "It seems you have a great deal of explaining to do." The general slowly turned to face him, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Poirot, you must understand. Before he could finish, a loud, chilling scream tore through the house. It came from the upper floors, a scream filled with terror, the kind that could freeze the blood in one's veins. Poirot's heart skipped a beat, his instincts screaming that this was no ordinary night. Without a word, he turned and hurried toward the stairs, his mind already working, connecting the dots. Lady Evelyn, the hostess who had welcomed him so warmly, now seemed like a distant memory. There was no time for pleasantries now. Something had happened, something that no one had expected. As Poirot reached the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before him, the shadows of the mansion seeming to stretch even further. The doors of the bedrooms were closed, but it was the one at the far end that drew his attention. The door was slightly ajar, the flickering light from within casting strange shadows against the walls. He pushed the door open carefully, his senses on high alert. Inside, the room was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint crackling of the fire in the hearth. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn, but there, lying motionless on the floor, was Lady Evelyn. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open in a final, frozen expression of horror. The scent of roses in the room was thick, almost overpowering, but it was not the fragrance that filled Poirot's senses. It was the quiet, suffocating stillness that hung in the air. Poirot knelt beside her, his heart racing as he examined the scene. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened. And yet, he knew, he felt it, that this was no accident. The woman had been murdered. The storm outside raged louder, its winds howling against the stone walls of the manor as Poirot rose to his feet. He turned to the door, his mind already piecing together the clues. There was no time to waste. He had to find the killer, and he had to do so before the storm engulfed them all. The game had begun, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had solved it. Chapter 3. The Disappearance. The storm raged outside, its fury echoing through the stone walls of the mansion, the wind howling like a forgotten ghost. Inside, the house was strangely quiet, save for the soft creak of floorboards beneath Poirot's feet. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own, as though the mansion itself were breathing, holding its breath in anticipation. Poirot stood still, his back straight and his eyes sharp, scanning the room where Lady Evelyn's lifeless form had been discovered. The room, once so full of warmth and elegance, now felt cold, desolate. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending occasional sparks into the air. But there was no comfort in its warmth, only the realization that something terribly wrong had transpired in this place. The guests had been assembled downstairs in the drawing room, the air thick with their whispers of concern and fear. Lady Evelyn's disappearance had only deepened the mystery. She had been alive when they last saw her. But now she was gone. No one had seen or heard anything unusual, except for that dreadful scream, her scream, that had echoed through the mansion like a warning. Poirot, ever calm, ever meticulous, had asked them all to remain where they were. He had to think, to piece together the fragments of this disturbing puzzle. But the pieces seemed to slip through his fingers like smoke. There were no obvious clues, no clear motive. No one had been seen leaving or entering the room, yet Lady Evelyn was gone. As Poirot entered the drawing room, his presence commanded immediate attention. All eyes turned to him, expectant, anxious, searching for answers. The aristocrat, who had remained eerily quiet up until now, spoke first, his voice tinged with unease. "Poirot," he said, his tone sharp, "what is going on here? Who would want to harm Lady Evelyn? And why did we hear that scream? Where has she gone?" Poirot's gaze flicked across the room, stopping momentarily on each guest. He could feel their eyes on him, their silent questions swirling in the air like unseen threads. He took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ah, my friends, the mystery grows deeper. But you must be patient. We have no answers yet, but I shall find them, one way or another. For now I ask you to remain calm and to stay here in this room." He turned his back on them and began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind him, his mind already working through the possibilities. His thoughts were as clear as ever, but there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a sense of impending danger that he could not yet explain. Suddenly, a voice broke through his thoughts. "Poirot, it's not just the disappearance." The voice belonged to the general, his face pale, his hands trembling. There is something more. Something I didn't tell you before." Poirot paused, his body tensing. He turned to face the general, his gaze piercing. "What is it, monsieur? What do you know that you haven't told me?" The general swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as though searching for something, someone, before he spoke. "It's about Lady Evelyn and the others. There are things I didn't want to believe, but now I'm not so sure. I know there is a connection between all of us, but I don't know what it is. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel it in my bones." Poirot's interest was piqued, his heart quickening ever so slightly. "You feel it in your bones, you say? It is a very strong intuition, my friend, but intuition alone will not solve this case." He stepped closer to the general, his eyes softening just a fraction. "Tell me, Monsieur Dupont, what is it you fear?" The general hesitated, a long, heavy silence hanging between them. Finally he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I fear we are being watched, that someone is among us, playing a game with us, but we are not in control. We are being led into something terrible, and I am afraid of what will happen next." The words hit Poirot with a strange weight, like a stone dropped into a quiet pond, the ripples spreading outward, disturbing the calm. A game, Poirot thought. He had suspected it from the moment he stepped into this house, an elaborate game of deceit, of manipulation. But the stakes were now higher than he had imagined. "Watchfulness is indeed a skill," Poirot murmured, almost to himself, "but it is also a curse. It can make a man see things that are not there, or miss what is hidden in plain sight." The general's face twisted with frustration, his anxiety growing. "But Poirot, Poirot raised a hand, his expression soft yet firm. "No, my friend. You are not the one I seek, for the game is not played by the one who is aware, It is played by those who pull the strings unseen. But do not worry, I will find them. I will find what is hidden." With that, Poirot turned and began to leave the room, his footsteps steady, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He needed answers, and he would find them, no matter how deeply they were buried. As he made his way toward the staircase, the air grew colder, the shadows longer, as if the very house were closing in on him. He reached the top of the stairs and turned to the left, his eyes falling on the door to Lady Evelyn's study. It was slightly ajar, and inside, the flickering light of the desk lamp illuminated the room, casting strange shapes on the walls. Poirot pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a few scattered papers and an overturned chair, but something was different this time. Something had changed in the atmosphere. He could feel it. The stillness of the room was oppressive, as though it held its breath, waiting for him to uncover its secrets. He walked to the desk and began sifting through the papers, his mind ticking away with each passing moment. He picked up a letter, its handwriting elegant yet hurried. As he read, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The letter was from Lady Evelyn, written just days before the gathering. It spoke of a secret, of something important that was meant to be revealed tonight, but only under certain conditions. It was the sort of letter that was meant to be found, and yet it held only fragments of the whole truth. Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the implications. A secret meeting, a hidden message, and now a disappearance. All of these threads wove together into something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The letter held a clue, a whisper of something darker that had been concealed beneath the elegant exterior of Lady Evelyn's life. The sound of footsteps broke his concentration, and Poirot turned to find one of the guests standing in the doorway. It was the actress, the woman who had seemed so poised earlier, now with a look of sheer panic on her face. "Poirot," she said breathlessly, "you need to come quickly. It's the General. He's—" Before she could finish, a loud crash echoed through the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. Poirot's heart skipped a beat as he turned to the actress, his voice calm but firm. "Go. Gather the others. I shall be there in a moment." The actress nodded, her face pale before rushing off into the shadows. Poirot remained in the study for only a moment longer, his mind racing with possibilities. He had to act quickly. The pieces were falling into place, but they weren't fitting together as he had hoped. There was something more at play here, something far more complex than he had anticipated. With a final glance at the room, Poirot moved swiftly, his footsteps echoing through the house as he descended the staircase. The storm outside raged even harder now, but inside, it was not the wind that worried him. It was the game that was unfolding in the darkness of the mansion, and the secrets that lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Watch. The house seemed to exhale with the rising winds, its heavy silence broken only by the occasional crackling of the fire in the hearth. Poirot stood still in the grand drawing room, his mind a whirl of calculations, observations, and inferences. It had been several hours since Lady Evelyn's disappearance, and yet the mystery seemed to grow thicker with each passing moment. The guests were all gathered below, their faces pale with anxiety, their words frenzied whispers, but Poirot remained composed, calm as ever. His mind, sharp as a blade, was already cutting through the thick fog of suspicion. As he walked through the dark hallways, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the cold, polished floors, Poirot's eyes darted to every detail, the smallest crevice, the faintest flicker of a shadow, the shifting light of the candles that danced eerily on the walls. It was as if the very walls were holding secrets, secrets they could not yet share. He had examined the study, questioned the guests, and followed the threads that seemed to connect each one of them to Lady Evelyn's disappearance. But nothing made sense. Nothing could explain why a woman like her, poised, dignified, and seemingly beyond reproach, would suddenly vanish into thin air. It was a puzzle wrapped in a riddle, and Poirot was determined to solve it. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. He turned to find the butler, standing at the threshold of the room, his face as impassive as ever. In his hand, he carried something small, a delicate object wrapped in a velvet cloth. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler said, his voice soft but firm, "I believe this may be of interest to you." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. He had seen the butler many times before, but there was something in his eyes now, a hesitation, a faint flicker of something hidden. It was as if he were unsure whether to reveal the object in his hands. "What is it?" Poirot asked, his voice calm, but his mind already working to decode the man's behavior. The butler placed the object on the polished wood of the table with a soft click, unwrapping the velvet cloth to reveal a pocket watch, a small, ornate piece with intricate engravings on the back. "This was found in Lady Evelyn's room," the butler explained. "I thought it may be significant, Monsieur Poirot." "It's strange. I have never seen her with such an item before." Poirot's eyes flicked to the watch, his mind immediately assessing every detail. The watch was small, almost delicate, with a tarnished silver casing that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Its design was elegant, yet simple, nothing too ostentatious, but it carried a certain weight, as though it had a story of its own. He ran his fingers lightly over the surface, feeling the subtle engravings on the back. "A gift," Poirot muttered to himself. "A token of affection, perhaps. But why was it left behind?" He flipped open the watch, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The timepiece ticked softly, a rhythmic sound that seemed to blend with the silence of the room. But then Poirot's eyes narrowed as he saw it. The time on the watch. It had stopped at exactly 12:12. A smile flickered across Poirot's face, though it was not one of triumph. It was a smile that spoke of recognition, of understanding. "A puzzle," he whispered, his voice almost to himself. "But of course." The butler watched him carefully, his face still unreadable. "Monsieur Poirot, what does it mean?" Poirot closed the watch gently, turning it over in his hands. "It is not the time that interests me, my friend. It is the inscription." He held the watch up to the light, revealing the fine engravings on the back. The inscription was simple yet profound. "For my dearest, forever yours, A." The letter A struck Poirot like a sudden realization, a jolt of recognition. His mind worked quickly, piecing together the information he had gathered over the past few hours. Lady Evelyn, the elegant and mysterious woman who had disappeared without a trace. The guests, each one hiding something, each one with a motive, a secret, a lie. Poirot's mind raced as he considered the possibilities, the engraving, the time, the A. It was all too deliberate, too carefully arranged to be an accident. "I suspect," Poirot began slowly, his voice contemplative, "that this watch is not merely a gift. It is a clue, a message, and it was left for someone to find. The butler seemed to shrink back slightly at the words, his eyes widening. A clue? But to whom, and why? Poirot stood still for a moment, his eyes fixed on the pocket watch, his mind ticking away with thoughts faster than the hands of the clock. "That is the question, isn't it?" he replied softly. "But there is more to this than a simple token of affection. This watch, you see, is part of a much larger game, a game that Lady Evelyn was playing, whether she knew it or not." Poirot paused, his gaze sharpening as he turned to the butler. "Tell me, monsieur, was anyone in the house with Lady Evelyn in the hours leading up to her disappearance?" The butler hesitated, his gaze flickering to the door as if to ensure no one else was listening. "There were visitors, but only briefly. The general had come by to speak with her. He was with her for a time, but he left before the dinner was served." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And what about the aristocrat, monsieur? Did he have any dealings with Lady Evelyn that you know of?" The butler looked uncomfortable, his fingers twitching nervously at his side. "Monsieur Valmont was often seen speaking with Lady Evelyn, but I cannot say for certain what they discussed." Poirot's mind was already racing, putting the pieces together, but something still eluded him. There was a connection between the guests, between the people who had gathered in the house, but it was hidden beneath layers of deception and carefully constructed facades. The watch was a clue, yes, but what did it point to? Was it the general's love, the aristocrat's envy, or something even darker? "I need to speak with the others," Poirot said, his voice steady but urgent. "We must find out who this A is. Only then will we be able to uncover the truth." The butler nodded but said nothing, his face now betraying an unease that Poirot did not miss. As Poirot left the room, his fingers brushed once more against the watch, feeling its weight. He didn't know what the truth was yet, but he could feel it, like a thread pulling at the edges of his thoughts. The game was getting more dangerous, more complex, and as the storm outside continued to rage, Poirot knew that the answers he sought were getting closer. But would he find them in time? Would the storm of secrets, lies, and deception consume them all before he could piece together the puzzle? Only time would tell. Chapter 5. Secrets Beneath the Surface. The storm outside intensified, the winds howling like a chorus of unseen voices, battering the walls of the mansion. Yet inside, the air was thick with a different kind of tension, one that was palpable, that wrapped itself around every conversation, every glance. The guests were beginning to unravel, their composure slowly cracking beneath the weight of Lady Evelyn's disappearance. Every one of them seemed to harbour their own quiet fears, their own unspoken suspicions. Poirot stood by the large window in the grand drawing-room, looking out over the darkened estate. The grounds were hidden by a thick curtain of mist, the world beyond reduced to a blurred vision of shadows and shapes. It was as if the house too was shrouded in mystery, a maze of secrets, waiting to be uncovered. He turned his attention back to the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the gathered guests. Their faces were familiar, yet each seemed more like a mask than a true reflection of their inner selves. There was the general, still brooding and distant, his posture rigid, as if the weight of his own conscience was bearing down on him. The aristocrat, Monsieur Valmont, was a study in anxiety, his eyes constantly darting around as if searching for an escape. Then there was the actress, who had not yet stopped smiling, but her smile was tighter now, forced. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, and Poirot knew from experience that such smiles often concealed deep unease. The room was heavy with quiet chatter, but Poirot's mind was far from the idle conversations. He had learned one thing already, that everyone here had something to hide. The connections between them were becoming clearer, but they were still tangled, like the threads of an ancient tapestry. The delicate balance of their lives had been disrupted, and now, like a spider caught in its own web, they were slowly pulling themselves further into the centre of the mystery. As Poirot took a slow, measured step forward, he felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere. The door to the drawing room opened, and in walked the butler, his face more serious than usual. "Poirot," he said softly, almost reluctantly, "there is something you need to see." A letter was found in Lady Evelyn's study. Poirot's interest was piqued immediately. A letter? Something more to the puzzle. He followed the butler without a word, his heart quickening ever so slightly. They moved through the grand hallway, the silence between them almost unnerving. The butler led him back to the study where Lady Evelyn had been found, the room still as it had been earlier, empty, yet filled with the echoes of her disappearance. The butler pointed to a desk drawer which had been left slightly ajar. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he approached it, his fingers lightly brushing the wood. Inside, nestled among papers and faded letters, lay the letter. He carefully unfolded it, his gaze sweeping over the elegant handwriting. The letter was addressed to someone simply named A, a name that stirred a memory he had yet to fully grasp. The letter itself was short, but its words were heavy, laden with a sense of foreboding. "Dearest A, I am afraid the time has come. The truth cannot remain buried forever, and if you seek to protect yourself, you must act swiftly. There are forces at play here, forces beyond what we can control. Do not trust anyone in this house, for there is a secret among us all, a secret that could destroy everything. I have made my decision. Tomorrow I will reveal all." Poirot felt a strange chill run down his spine as he read the final lines. "I have made my decision. Tomorrow I will reveal all." Lady Evelyn had known something so dangerous that she had planned to reveal it. Tomorrow, Poirot whispered to himself. But now, she is gone. He carefully placed the letter back into the drawer, his mind already working, running through the possibilities. There was a deeper game being played here, one far more sinister than he had imagined. Lady Evelyn had known the risks, and yet she had been determined to expose whatever had been lurking beneath the surface. But who A was, and why she had written to them, was still unclear. "What is it, Monsieur Poirot?" the butler asked, his voice shaky, as though the weight of the mystery were beginning to crack his calm demeanour. Poirot stood still, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the desk lamp. "There is much we do not know, my friend, but one thing is certain. Lady Evelyn was not the helpless victim she appeared to be. She was planning something that may have cost her life." He turned to the butler, his gaze sharp. "And I believe, monsieur, that you know more than you have told me." The butler's face paled, his eyes darting nervously. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You may think I do not notice, but I have observed you carefully. The way you watch the guests, the way you flinch when certain names are spoken. You know more than you let on. What is your connection to this house? To Lady Evelyn?
The butler swallowed hard, his eyes lowering. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope until at last he spoke. I am more involved than I should be, he admitted quietly. I was once very close to Lady Evelyn. We shared a past, and now I fear that past is catching up with us. I cannot explain everything, but there are forces in this house, forces that go far beyond what you can see. Lady Evelyn was aware of them. She knew too much, and I fear that's why she is gone. Poirot leaned in, his voice steady but insistent. Tell me, monsieur, what do you know? The butler hesitated for a moment longer, but finally his eyes met Poirot's and he whispered, "The watch, the one
you found. It belonged to her. But it wasn't just a gift. It was a marker, a way for her to communicate with someone, a warning. But who? I do not know. I only know that she was afraid, and that she was trying to protect herself." Poirot felt a surge of understanding, his mind beginning to piece together the fragmented puzzle. The watch, the letter, the cryptic message about a secret. They were all parts of the same web, a web woven with lies, deception, and a hidden truth that no one was prepared to face. He turned back to the butler, his voice low. "Thank you, monsieur. You have given me a piece of the puzzle. Now, I must find the rest." The butler nodded, his face a mask of uncertainty, but before Poirot could ask more questions, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. The guests had begun to gather in the hallway, and Poirot knew his time was running out. The storm outside raged with more intensity, but it was the storm inside the mansion that concerned him now. He walked back to the drawing room, his mind buzzing with the new revelations. There was a secret hidden in this house, a secret that someone was willing to kill for, and Lady Evelyn had been the key to uncovering it. But who would be next to fall? Who else was involved in this twisted game? As Poirot stood in the centre of the room, the faces of the guests all watching him, he could feel the answer slipping closer. He could almost see it, like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. But it wasn't enough yet. Not until he had found the truth. Chapter 6. The shifting allegiances. The wind outside howled through the ancient walls of the mansion, the sound of its fury seeping into every corner. But inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly still. Poirot stood in the centre of the grand drawing room, his eyes sharp, his mind calculating, as he watched the guests shift uneasily in their seats. A game was afoot, and the rules were becoming more treacherous with every passing moment. The mansion, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, felt less like a home and more like a tomb, a place where the secrets of its inhabitants threatened to rise to the surface like long-buried corpses. Poirot's gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces of those who had been brought together under such mysterious circumstances. The general, still tall and imposing, stood with his back rigid, his hand resting on the back of a chair, as if holding himself together by sheer force of will. His eyes, however, were tired, haunted, as though a storm of his own had taken root inside him. The actress, who had maintained an air of cheerful poise until now, was wringing her hands nervously, her gaze flicking between Poirot and the others. Monsieur Valmont, the aristocrat, seemed more out of place than ever, his finely tailored suit and perfectly groomed hair at odds with the growing tension in his eyes. But it was the butler who caught Poirot's attention now. The man had been quiet, almost invisible in the background, but there was something about the way he watched the others, something about his stillness that spoke volumes. He had confessed to Poirot that he knew more than he had let on, and Poirot's instincts told him that this was not a man who would remain passive for long. He was playing a part, hiding something, and the time for secrets was rapidly running out. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the quiet room like a sharp blade. "Mes amis," he said, his tone calm yet laden with an undeniable weight. "It is time we stopped dancing around the truth. We are all here, gathered under the shadow of a tragedy, yet not one of you is without a part to play in this game. Lady Evelyn is gone, yes, but her disappearance is not a random act. It is a part of something much greater, something we have yet to fully understand." He paused, allowing the tension to build, letting his words settle into the air. "I have spoken with each of you, and I have gathered my observations. It is clear that we all have secrets, some darker than others. But one thing stands out to me. The allegiances in this room are shifting, changing with each passing hour, and one of you is not who you appear to be." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. Poirot could see the flicker of fear in their eyes, a fear of being unmasked, a fear that the game was no longer in their control. "It is not only the who that matters, mes amis," Poirot continued, his voice smooth, yet tinged with something deeper, something that sent a ripple of unease through the room. "It is the why. Who stands to gain from Lady Evelyn's disappearance? Who would have the means and the motive to orchestrate such a carefully planned event?" A breath of silence followed. Poirot's eyes locked on the General. He had suspected this man from the start, but now, as the tension thickened in the air, his suspicions grew. "General Dupont," Poirot said softly, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You have been hiding something, have you not? You were in Lady Evelyn's company before she disappeared, yes? And yet, you claim to know nothing of what happened to her." The General's face flushed slightly, but his voice was firm. "Monsieur Poirot, I told you already, nothing happened between us. I am as much in the dark as you are. My only concern is for her safety." Poirot stepped closer, his every movement deliberate, his presence commanding. "But you do not seem so concerned about the others. You seem focused on yourself, monsieur. You seem to be protecting something. Someone, perhaps." The General's jaw clenched, and for a moment Poirot thought he saw the flicker of guilt flash in his eyes. But the General quickly masked it, his face hardening once more. "I am no criminal," the General snapped. "I am a soldier, a man of honor. I have no reason to harm Lady Evelyn." Poirot allowed a small, knowing smile to play on his lips. "Ah, but that is where you are wrong, monsieur. Honor is a fragile thing, and sometimes it can be twisted into something far darker. Tell me, did you know of her plans? Did you know she was going to reveal something tomorrow?" The General stiffened, his eyes narrowing as if he had been struck by a sudden realization. "You know about that?" His voice faltered slightly, betraying him. Poirot's smile widened ever so slightly. "Mais oui, I do. Lady Evelyn was going to expose something, a secret, something so powerful that it could bring down everything. But she was silenced before she could speak." He turned his gaze to the others, each one of them now trembling under the weight of his scrutiny. "And one of you is responsible for that silence." The room held its breath. Poirot's gaze shifted to the aristocrat, Monsieur Valmont. "And you, monsieur, what is your role in all of this? Your history with Lady Evelyn is well known, but your presence here,
Your connection to her. Poirot trailed off, his eyes sharp with meaning. Monsieur Valmont's face flushed, and for the first time since Poirot had met him, the mask of calm slipped. "I have no part in this," he said, his voice shaking. I am a businessman, a man of affairs. Poirot interrupted him, his voice smooth as velvet but cold as ice. "But you are not just a businessman, are you? No, Monsieur Valmont. You are a man who stands to lose everything if certain truths come to light. A man who
Might do anything, to protect his reputation, his empire. Monsieur Valmont's mouth tightened into a thin line, but his silence spoke volumes. Poirot turned away from him, his mind racing through the threads of the conversation. The pieces were coming together, slowly, methodically. The general, the aristocrat, the actress, and even the butler, all of them had been playing roles, masking their true intentions, hiding their motivations. But Poirot could feel the game shifting. The alliances were breaking apart. The pressure was mounting. He looked at the others. We are on the brink of something much larger than just Lady Evelyn's disappearance. There is a secret here, something that binds you all together. But what is it? What is the truth that has remained hidden for so long? The silence in the room deepened. Poirot's voice softened, his tone almost soothing as he let the weight of his words sink in. Sooner or later the truth will find its way to the surface. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same again. Chapter 7. The web unravels. The mansion had grown eerily quiet, the storm outside no longer a distant rumble but a constant, deafening roar that rattled the windows and filled the air with an oppressive sense of urgency. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, sending brief flickers of light across the darkened room. But even the warmth from the flames could not lift the cold tension that hung thick in the air. Poirot stood in the centre of the drawing room, his sharp eyes narrowing as he observed the guests gathered around him. They were no longer the strangers they had once appeared to be. Now, each one was a piece in a puzzle, their faces flickering with unease, suspicion, and fear. He had unravelled enough of their secrets to know that they were all connected by something far darker than mere coincidence, but the true nature of that connection was still elusive, slipping through his fingers like sand. The butler, still pale and tight-lipped, had not yet spoken further about the letter or the strange occurrences that had been hinted at in the past few days. The general had tried to mask his anxiety with a stiff posture, but Poirot had seen the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. The actress, her once immaculate appearance now frayed at the edges, was nervously glancing around, her eyes darting toward the others, as if expecting them to turn on her at any moment. And Monsieur Valmont, he had become a shadow of the man who had first arrived at the mansion. The elegant smile was gone, replaced by a mask of quiet terror. Poirot took a deep breath, his mind working furiously as he pieced together the final elements of the puzzle. There was something in the air, something that was about to break wide open, but he couldn't afford to let the tension overtake him. He needed to be calm, clear-headed. The truth was there, just beneath the surface, and all he had to do was coax it out into the light. His voice, when it finally came, was soft, yet filled with an undeniable authority. "Mes amis," he began, his eyes sweeping over the group. "The web we are caught in is one of deception, of hidden truths. Each of you has kept your secrets well, too well. But no secret can remain hidden forever." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. A subtle shift had occurred in the room. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and the guests, who had once appeared uncertain, now seemed to be on edge. They knew, as Poirot did, that the moment of revelation was approaching. "The time for hiding is over," Poirot continued. "Lady Evelyn's disappearance was not the end of this mystery. It was the beginning of something much larger. We have been playing a game, but the rules have shifted. The players are no longer the ones you see before you. There are others, hidden behind masks, and the one who is pulling the strings is still among us." He felt their eyes on him, felt the room lean in, waiting for the next step in. The unraveling. Poirot allowed himself a moment's pause, letting the tension build. "The watch," Poirot said, his voice almost a whisper. "The letter, the secret message. Each piece leads us closer to the truth. But there is something more. The why behind Lady Evelyn's disappearance, her decision to reveal something, to expose someone, this is the key." The aristocrat, Monsieur Valmont, stepped forward, his face now pale and drawn, his movements jerky. "What do you mean, Poirot? What truth are you talking about? There is nothing more to discover here. Lady Evelyn, she was just a woman caught up in something she couldn't control." His words faltered, as though even he didn't fully believe what he was saying. Poirot fixed him with a steely gaze. "Ah, but monsieur, that is where you are wrong. Lady Evelyn was in control. She knew what she was doing. She knew more than she was willing to reveal. But someone here was afraid of what she would expose. Someone here was afraid of what the truth would do." Poirot turned to the general. "Monsieur Dupont, you were close to her, yes? You claim to have no knowledge of her plans, but I believe you are hiding something that connects you to the secret Lady Evelyn was going to reveal." The general stiffened, his face reddening with anger. "I told you, I have no part in this. I would never harm her. Poirot interjected, holding up a hand. "But that is where you are wrong again, my friend. You may not have been the one to lay hands on her, but you were a part of this. You were a part of the secret. You knew something, monsieur, and now the truth is slipping away from you." The general opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot wasn't finished. "There was a secret, a truth, that could have destroyed everything you have worked for, and Lady Evelyn was going to expose it." Poirot continued, his voice steady but commanding. "But now, someone else is trying to silence her. Someone who knew that she was too dangerous to be allowed to live." The tension in the room was unbearable now. Every guest seemed to be on the edge of their seat, waiting for the final revelation. Poirot's gaze flicked to each of them in turn, looking for the faintest sign, the smallest crack in their facade. "Do you see now?" Poirot asked softly, his eyes lingering on the general, the aristocrat, the actress. "Do you see how the pieces fit together? The watch was not just a gift. It was a symbol, a message. It was meant to be found, and it was found by the right person, someone who would understand its meaning, someone who could piece together the puzzle." The room was deathly quiet, and Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, just long enough to make sure every person present was hanging on to his every word. "But I am afraid there is one among you who has been playing a far darker game," Poirot said, his voice dropping even lower. "One among you who has been orchestrating this entire affair from the shadows, and now the truth is about to come to light." The general, the aristocrat and the actress all looked at each other, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. But Poirot could see it now, clearer than ever before. The fear was no longer a front for concern, It was a genuine fear of being discovered, and that fear told him everything he needed to know. Poirot took one final step forward, his eyes piercing through the tension like a blade. "The mastermind behind this deception," he said, his voice calm but filled with undeniable certainty, "is none other than you, Monsieur Valmont." The aristocrat's face paled, his lips parting in shock. "What? You cannot be serious." Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, but I am. You thought you could manipulate the others, hide behind your charm and play your game of power. But you miscalculated, monsieur. Lady Evelyn knew who you were, and now the game has turned against you." The aristocrat staggered back, his eyes wild, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for the right words to defend himself. "No," he cried, his voice cracking. "You're wrong." "I did nothing, Poirot." Poirot's gaze never wavered, his mind already putting the final pieces into place. The letter, the watch, it was all meant to expose you. Lady Evelyn knew of your dealings, of the dark secrets you were hiding. And now, it is too late. The truth has been uncovered. As the guests stood in stunned silence, Poirot's voice softened, almost soothing, as he spoke the final words that would seal the fate of the man who had orchestrated it all. "You, Monsieur Valmont, are the one who has been pulling the strings, and now the truth is free." The web had finally unravelled, and the game was over. Chapter 8. The final twist. The mansion had fallen into a strange quiet after Poirot's declaration. The storm outside continued its relentless assault on the house, its howling winds rattling the windows, as if nature itself were in league with the secrets that had been so carefully hidden within the walls of this grand estate. The air inside was heavy, thick with the weight of revelation, and yet no one spoke. The tension that had been building for days had finally reached its breaking point. Poirot stood in the centre of the drawing room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the faces of the guests who surrounded him. Their expressions were a mix of disbelief, fear, and something darker: guilt. They had all been playing a part, unknowingly or otherwise, in a game that had spiraled out of control. And now, as the truth began to unravel, their carefully constructed facades were beginning to crumble. The aristocrat, Monsieur Valmont, had recoiled as if struck, his face ashen, his eyes wide with shock. His mouth opened and closed in futile protest, but there was no denying the truth that Poirot had revealed. The letter, the watch, the cryptic messages, all of them pointed to him. He had been the one pulling the strings, the one whose desperation to protect his empire had led him to murder. He had orchestrated Lady Evelyn's disappearance, knowing that she would expose his darkest secrets. But Poirot was not yet finished. He knew that the truth had not been fully revealed, that there was still something lurking beneath the surface, something even more dangerous than Valmont's greed. "Monsieur Valmont." Poirot's voice was calm, measured, but there was an underlying force in his tone that sent a ripple of unease through the room. "You have played your part well, but now I must ask you something. Something that has been troubling me since the moment I set foot in this house." Valmont's eyes darted nervously from Poirot to the others, his face twisting in panic. I don't know what you mean." Poirot took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Who else was involved, monsieur? You did not act alone. There was another hand guiding you, another force pulling at your strings. I know you, monsieur. You are not the mastermind. You were the puppet." The aristocrat's face faltered for a moment, his eyes flashing with a flicker of recognition, a brief moment of vulnerability. But he quickly masked it, retreating behind his veneer of arrogance. "No," he spat, his voice trembling with anger. "You are wrong. I did everything myself. Lady Evelyn, she—" "You are lying," Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp. "You did not do it alone. You had help, and now the truth is about to come out." The general, who had been silent for so long, suddenly stirred, his eyes widening as he turned to face Poirot. "What do you mean? What do you know?" Poirot raised a hand, signalling for silence before he turned his gaze back to Valmont. "You thought you had control over the situation. You thought you could manipulate Lady Evelyn, silence her, and cover your tracks. But there was one thing you did not account for, one thing you failed to see." Valmont's face paled further, his hands trembling at his sides. His eyes darted nervously, searching for an escape, but Poirot's presence seemed to trap him, suffocate him. "Lady Evelyn was never alone in this, monsieur," Poirot continued, his voice low, almost soothing now, as if guiding the final pieces of the puzzle into place. "She had allies, hidden allies, people who were watching her every move. And it is those allies who will reveal the final piece of the puzzle." A sudden realization seemed to dawn on Valmont's face. His eyes widened in horror, and he took a step back, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. No, he whispered. "You can't. You don't know what you're saying." Poirot's eyes were cold, his mind working with the precision of a master chess player, the final pieces of the mystery clicking into place. "I know exactly what I am saying, monsieur. You thought you were the only one with power here, but you were wrong, and now you will face the consequences." The room was completely still, the tension so thick that it felt as if the air itself had frozen. Then, without warning, Poirot reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, one that had been carefully concealed, hidden in the folds of his clothing. He held it up, letting the light from the fire cast a soft glow on the delicate paper. "This," Poirot said, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight, "was found in Lady Evelyn's personal effects. It is a letter addressed to someone whose identity I have only recently discovered. The letter was meant to be read by a trusted friend, someone who was working with Lady Evelyn to uncover the truth." He tore open the envelope, revealing the letter inside. The words on the paper were elegant, but the meaning behind them was sharp and cutting. "Dearest A, the time has come. We can no longer wait. I have learned too much, and I fear the consequences of revealing it, but I cannot turn back now. Tomorrow I will expose the truth to Poirot. He will understand. He will find you, just as he has found the others. We must end this before it is too late." Poirot paused, letting the silence settle over the room like a shroud. He slowly looked up, his eyes locking with Valmont's, whose face was now a mask of sheer panic. "Ah!" the aristocrat gasped, his voice cracking. "Yes, monsieur," Poirot replied softly. "A, the one who was pulling your strings, the one who was working with Lady Evelyn all along." The room seemed to implode as the final revelation hit. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, just beyond their reach. The letter was the key. The A, the one Lady Evelyn had planned to expose, was none other than... Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was you, Monsieur Dupont. You were the true mastermind." The general's face froze, his eyes widening in shock. He staggered back, as if struck by an invisible blow. His mouth opened and closed in a desperate attempt to form words, but none came. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking. "No, Poirot, you can't be serious." Poirot's expression remained impassive as he stepped closer. "Ah, but I am, monsieur. Lady Evelyn knew what you were hiding. She knew your secret, and she was going to expose it. But you could not allow that. Could you?" The general's shoulders slumped as the weight of the accusation crushed him. "I had no choice," he muttered, barely audible. "She was going to ruin everything, everything I had worked for." Poirot's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "And so you silenced her. You thought you could escape the truth, but the truth always comes to light, Monsieur Dupont. You are the one who killed Lady Evelyn." The room was deathly silent, save for the crackling of the fire. The guests stood motionless, frozen in shock, unable to process the revelation. The storm outside had finally begun to subside, but the storm within the mansion was just beginning to reach its peak. Poirot turned to the others, his voice now commanding, "It is over. The game is finished. The truth has been revealed, and with that, the web had unravelled completely. The players had been exposed. The truth was no longer a shadow. It was a harsh, unforgiving light. And now there was nowhere left to hide." Chapter 9. The Confession. The mansion, once grand and full of life, now seemed like a mausoleum. The silence that followed Poirot's final revelation was deafening. The storm outside had died down, its fury replaced by a biting stillness, and yet inside, the air was thick with tension. No one moved, no one spoke. The truth had come crashing down, and now the guests were left to deal with the consequences of their actions. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his posture as composed as ever, his mind still sharp and calculating, despite the emotional storm that had just unfolded. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces of the guests, each one now trapped in their own world of shock, guilt, and disbelief. General Dupont, the man who had orchestrated Lady Evelyn's murder, was trembling. His once strong facade had crumbled, and now he stood before them, a broken man, his eyes hollow with regret. His shoulders were slumped, and his breath came in shallow gasps as though he were struggling to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. Monsieur Valmont, the aristocrat who had once been so confident and smooth in his manner, now appeared fragile, his face pale, his jaw clenched tightly as he stared at the floor. The actress, too, had lost her earlier composure. She stood by the fireplace, her hands wringing in her lap, her eyes staring into the flickering flames as if seeking some kind of escape from the situation. Poirot's voice broke the silence as soft as a whisper, but it carried the weight of finality. "Monsieur Dupont," he said, turning toward the general. "It is time." Dupont's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "Time for what?" "What more do you want from me, Poirot? I've told you everything. I did it. Yes, I killed her, but I had no choice. You have to understand. Lady Evelyn was going to expose me. She knew everything. I couldn't let her ruin me." Poirot stepped forward, his expression serene but stern. "Mon ami, you chose to silence her. You chose to murder her in cold blood because you feared the consequences of your own actions. But the truth always, Monsieur Dupont, has a way of finding its way to the surface." Dupont collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking violently. "She was going to ruin me," he muttered again, almost pleading, his voice breaking. "I had to do it. She had all the evidence. She had found out about the illegal dealings, my past with those who would destroy everything. She was my only threat." Poirot's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I understand fear, monsieur. But fear cannot justify murder. Lady Evelyn had her own reasons for exposing you. She was not some helpless victim. She was a woman with a purpose, and you underestimated her strength. Dupont's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, regret, perhaps. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling, and for the first time his pride seemed to slip away, revealing the broken man beneath. Poirot continued, his voice low and soothing, as if trying to guide the general toward some kind of acceptance. But now, the truth is free, and it will not rest. You are not the only one who has paid a price here, Monsieur Dupont. Others have been hurt by your actions, and now there will be justice. The general's head drooped, and a single tear slipped down his cheek, a final sign of the man's inner collapse. At that moment, the door creaked open, and in stepped the butler, his face pale, his body rigid. Poirot turned to him, his brow furrowing slightly. "Ah, monsieur," Poirot said softly, his eyes studying the man carefully. "It seems you have been waiting for this moment as well." The butler stood still for a moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he stepped forward, his gaze meeting Poirot's with a mixture of resignation and regret. "Mon cher Poirot," the butler began, his voice hoarse, "you have uncovered the truth. There is no denying it now." He hesitated, his hands shaking at his sides before he spoke again. "But there is something you do not yet know. Something I must tell you before you think the game is over." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind already calculating the implications. "What is it, monsieur? What more do you have to tell me?" The butler took a deep breath, his face pale. "It is not just Dupont who has been hiding something. I, too, have been playing a part in this tragic affair." He paused, his words heavy with meaning, before he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was the one who had the letter that Lady Evelyn intended to send to you, Poirot. She trusted me with it, knowing that I would deliver it to you in time. But I didn't. I couldn't." Poirot's gaze remained steady, his mind piecing the information together with careful precision. The butler continued, his voice shaky but clear. "Lady Evelyn, she knew that if I gave you that letter, it would seal her fate. She understood that Dupont would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. She had made plans that would have exposed everything, and she trusted me to help her. But when the time came, I hesitated. I could not bring myself to deliver the letter. I thought maybe if I waited, if I stayed silent, it would all go away, that it would stop. But I was wrong. I should have trusted her." Poirot listened intently, his eyes never leaving the butler's face as the truth began to unfurl. The man had been caught between duty and fear, torn by a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "There is more," the butler continued, his voice trembling. "Before she died, Lady Evelyn asked me to ensure that her secret reached you. She had planned to leave you the final clue, her confession, the truth she had known about Dupont. But it was too late. She didn't have the chance. She left me that letter, and I failed her." Poirot's eyes softened for a moment, as if understanding the conflict the butler had faced. "You were caught between the truth and your own fears, mon ami, and that fear cost her life." The butler nodded silently, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Lady Evelyn knew that she was walking a dangerous path," Poirot continued, his voice soothing but firm. "But she also knew that her actions were meant to bring justice. You, monsieur, played a part in that. And now justice will be served." Poirot turned to the rest of the guests, who had watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. He let the room fall silent for a few moments before he spoke again, his voice calm, yet filled with the quiet power of finality. Lady Evelyn has gone, but she has not forgotten. Her final wish was to see the truth come to light, and she succeeded. The game is over. The truth has been revealed, and justice will take its course. He looked once more at the butler, then at Dupont. Now, you must face the consequences of your actions. All of you. The room remained still, the finality of Poirot's words hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. The storm outside had finally ceased, leaving only a haunting calm in its wake. The mansion, once full of secrets and lies, now stood as a monument to the truth, raw, unyielding, and undeniable. Poirot turned to leave, his steps soft yet determined. The puzzle had been solved. The game had ended. And with the confession of those involved, the truth had set everything free. Chapter 10. The quiet conclusion. The storm had finally passed, and as dawn broke over the horizon, the sky was bathed in the soft golden light of morning. The mansion, which had once felt like a dark labyrinth of secrets and lies, now seemed almost peaceful, as though the night's turmoil had been nothing more than a fleeting nightmare. But for Poirot, the silence of the new day was not one of comfort. It was one of quiet reflection, a calm before the inevitable reckoning of truth. He sat by the window, his sharp eyes watching the first light of day filter through the trees outside, casting long shadows across the dewy grounds. The world seemed to be waking up around him, but Poirot's mind was still deep in the maze of the past few days, turning over the pieces of the puzzle that had only just fallen into place. Behind him, the house was stirring. The other guests, once fraught with tension and uncertainty, now seemed to move with a certain heaviness. They no longer whispered in corners or exchanged nervous glances. The game, as Poirot had so aptly put it, was over. The truth had been uncovered, the veil of deception lifted, and now they would all face the consequences of their actions. But Poirot knew that for all the answers he had uncovered, there were still lingering questions. Not about the case. No, that was clear. But about the people who had been caught in the web. Could they ever truly be free of the burden of their secrets? Would they ever come to terms with the choices they had made? And, perhaps most troubling of all, what had they learned about themselves in the process? The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, soft and measured, and Poirot turned to see the butler enter the room. His face was tired, his shoulders slumped, but there was a certain clarity in his eyes now, something that had been missing when Poirot first met him. The man had been part of the tragedy, tangled in the same web of lies and deceit, but now, perhaps, there was hope for redemption. Monsieur Poirot, the butler said quietly, his voice almost reverent, I wanted to thank you for everything. You've uncovered the truth and, well, I suppose there's no more to say. Poirot studied the man strength and courage faced it in the end. And so too must we. The butler didn't reply, but his shoulders seemed to ease slightly, as though the weight of the world had been lifted, even if just a little. For the first time in a long while, he stood a little taller, as though he were beginning to accept the consequences of his actions. Poirot turned back toward the window, his gaze sweeping over the estate once more. The mansion now seemed different somehow. The oppressive atmosphere that had clung to it for so long was gone. The truth had carved a path through the darkness, and now the light of a new day was filtering in. But Poirot knew that the aftermath would not be as simple as sunlight and shadow. The choices that had been made, the lives that had been touched, would ripple outward, changing everything in their wake. The sound of the other guests gathering in the dining room reached Poirot's ears. He had asked them to remain for one final conversation, a reckoning of sorts. He knew they needed closure, just as much as he needed to ensure that the justice Lady Evelyn had sought would be carried out. As he made his way downstairs, Poirot's thoughts were still on the woman who had set everything into motion. Lady Evelyn. She had been more than just a victim. She had been a force of nature, a woman of unwavering conviction. She had sought the truth, even if it cost her life, and in the end, that truth had been revealed. Her strength, her courage, had led Poirot to the answers, to the final pieces of the puzzle that had eluded him for so long. He entered the dining room, where the guests were seated, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and lingering guilt. They all turned to him as he entered, their eyes heavy with the knowledge that everything had changed. Poirot's eyes met each of theirs, steady and unflinching. They were no longer the players in a game of deception. They were witnesses now to the truth. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm and soothing, yet carrying the weight of finality. "The game is over. The truth has been revealed, and now we must all live with it." He paused, letting the words sink in. Each guest seemed to be processing the gravity of the situation in their own way. The general, once so proud and unyielding, now looked like a man who had seen the deepest recesses of his own soul. Monsieur Valmont, who had been so consumed by his own empire, now appeared fragile, his facade cracked, and the actress, who had smiled her way through it all, now sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face drawn and weary. "The truth does not come without consequences," Poirot continued, his voice soft but steady. "You all played a part in Lady Evelyn's death, whether directly or indirectly. But now, the question is not who caused her death. It is what you will do with the truth now that it is in your hands." There was a long silence. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They understood. Poirot gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming the understanding that had passed between them all. "Lady Evelyn's death was not in vain," he said quietly. "Her courage, her determination, brought the truth to light. And that, mes amis, is the only legacy we can truly leave behind, to stand in the light, to face the truth, no matter the cost." And with that, Poirot turned and made his way toward the door, his footsteps light and purposeful. Behind him the guests sat in silence, each one lost in their thoughts, each one facing the consequences of the choices they had made. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison of secrets, now felt different, lighter. The shadows of the past had not vanished, but they had been illuminated by the truth. And in that light perhaps there was hope. Hope for redemption. Hope for change. Poirot stepped out into the soft morning light, the air crisp and cool, his thoughts already turning toward the next case. There would always be another puzzle to solve, another mystery to uncover. But for now he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The game had ended. The truth had been revealed, and that was enough. The end